You are listening to Judging Meghan with your host, Meghan Judge. Before I introduce my guest, I'm going to tell you the following. So if you were concerned that Los Angeles residents were going to sail away in the hurricane/earthquake, the hurricane is what people are calling it. We are okay. We're just fine. Palm Springs, on the other hand, there's definitely massive flooding. And the thing is me thinking that I'm an expert on hurricanes, just growing up in the East Coast. I was really freaked out by the fact that we had this tropical storm hurricane warning. I'll bring my guest in a second and ask her about it. But we don't get this stuff in California. So if you don't believe in global warming or that the climate is changing, I don't know what to say to you. We haven't had a warning like this since 1939. I was driving my husband insane because I was like, go to the store. We need to get water. We need to get like gas in our car. We need to get money out. It's good to always be prepared in emergencies. But I was going like, you would have thought that like it was the end of the world because I was so paranoid. I'm going to introduce my guest right now, Violetta Znorkowski. And I'm saying that really slowly because I wanted to make sure I said it correctly. Is that correct? I said it the first time when we practiced. Znorkowski.
I'm so impressed. That is correct. Yeah.
Oh my God. I feel like I won a contest right now. Before I kind of give your impressive background, you live in Australia. You grew up in the States.
Yeah.
What part of the States did you grow up in?
New Jersey.
Okay, so you're an East Coaster. I knew I liked you.
East Coaster, baby.
But do you know like how it is? Because we grew up on the East Coast, like we were constantly worried about these hurricanes. Whereas,
oh yeah,
when you live here in LA, I've lived here over 20 years. We were sitting in our living room and I was just like sitting on a chair and the house started shaking during this so-called hurricane, which was really just here a little bit of rain, but people were like going insane. It was all over the news all day long. Like you would have thought it was the end of the world. Were you by chance watching the American news yesterday?
I wasn't, but that reminds me of when countries like Australia get a sprinkle of snow. And they just start like freaking out, things shut down. And on the East Coast, you could be walking with like 3 feet of snow or 10 feet of snow on either side and no one bats an eyelash. So that's what that reminds me of.
Well, it's just so weird. People in LA are the worst drivers in general, but also nobody knows how to drive in the rain here. It's so weird. Like people are like, oh my God, it's sprinkling. And people like pull over to the side of the road. But yet we're fine if your entire house shakes and dishes fall and there's an earthquake. It's like, whatever, move on to the next thing. We've all been put here for a reason and we all deserve acceptance.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.
I'm a trauma survivor from a really young age, and I have been diagnosed with complex PTSD in the past few years. I've been surrounded by death and abuse much of my life. I've been dragged through the mud and have been to the point of not wanting to go on anymore. Through my interviews with other survivors, I've learned that there is a way out. From recovering to surviving and thriving, we all have the strength to come out the other side.
You are listening to Judging Meghan.
I'm going to introduce you right now. So Violetta Znorkowski. Now I'm a professional.
Yeah.
Violetta, aka Violet. You said you prefer either. So I'm going to call you Violet because she said it was okay. She is a brain body trainer, a holistic therapist, a podcaster, and her company and podcast are both called Expand and Impact. Welcome to the podcast. Did I say everything correctly?
You did. And before we jump into the nitty gritty, I just realized that maybe my mic isn't connected. It's my laptop microphone and not my mic.
That's fine.
Can
fine.
you hear me okay?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're not editing this out. I'm not editing it out.
That's fine.
So everyone just know that sometimes these things can happen in the world of podcasting. And sometimes I don't want to edit stuff out. So yeah, you're totally fine. Don't even worry about it.
2 mics and I'm on the wrong one.
No, I mean, I do that stuff constantly. I mean, I have a story. So one day I recorded with a man and he was the nicest man. And I recorded the entire episode and lost the whole episode. And I had to tell him, and we're supposed to reschedule, but it's like, I don't, like, sometimes you don't, it's out of your control. Like, these things happen. It's
Yeah.
called technology, you know? Anyways,
Yeah.
welcome to the podcast. Now that we have that stuff out of the way, I was intrigued by you, just to start, because I haven't ever had anybody on that describes what they do in the way that you do. And I want to start out by saying something really briefly. So it's really important in life. We're all going to go through something in life, right? And I happen to have heard a few stories in the past couple weeks, and one of which is horrific. And I just want people to understand that grief is grief, and it takes all different kinds of forms. And at some point in your life, you're going to go through grief, or you're going to go through loss. And part of why I do what I do, and I bring people like Violet on, is to kind of like normalize talking about grief and loss and trauma and all the things that I talk about, but also know that it's okay to be going through things and not know how to deal with them. So I was intrigued by what you wrote on your bio and wanted to have you on because of that exact reason. And I feel like it's fitting today because I am kind of sitting with some bad news that I've been hearing from several people over the past couple weeks. And I was hoping we could just first start out with a little background on you and then kind of get into it. So I just kind of wanted to start out there. Thoughts?
Thank you for that introduction. And also, as you were speaking, I can definitely sense that grief. I don't know what you're going through, but I can definitely sense it in the room. And it's, grief in general, like you mentioned, takes many forms. And sometimes in the most subtle situations that people don't validate us for, that it can be really hard to admit that we are actually feeling some sort of type of way if the external world and what we're conditioned on the outside doesn't match up with how grief is supposed to look. So I'm really excited to jump in and also share a little bit about how grief, the role grief has played in my life, which is a bit, I suppose, uncharacteristic. It's like in these subtle moments that maybe on the outside, people wouldn't know I'm grieving. And you never know what someone may be grieving for. And then also that permission to allow ourselves to grieve for things that are different, that maybe aren't these big tragedies or these big like pieces of news that we get, but actually on a more intimate level with ourselves and how we change. There's a lot of grief involved in change.
Well, I think too, like for the news that isn't directly affecting me, and I at some point maybe we'll share it down the road, but it's when things in life, when things happen to people, good people, and we don't understand why. And I'm a very spiritual person. Okay. And I don't understand why some people, like one person seems to go through their whole life and, nothing really we never know what people are going through really, but just like tragedy after tragedy, and like why certain people have to go through certain things. And sometimes I'm just completely stopped in my tracks. And, when this is what I do now for a living, this is my job. And I try to talk to people and give advice from my own experiences with loss and grief, but also just like being like, why do some people have to go through so much? So before we kind of get into your story, do you have any thoughts on that?
I ask myself this question as well, Megan, because there is so much that we do control within, creating our reality and creating our own path. Meeting people or going into relationships, we can say no, we can say yes, we can lean in, we can lean out. And yet I do ask myself the question, why do some people seem to be going through more of the hardship? And I don't have an answer to that other than that's some people's fate. And I guess that's what separates, the parts of life that we do have control over and the parts that we don't. And in those moments, I always invite, the women that I work with, I always remind myself is, well, where can I control the situation that is out of my control? In the sense, how can I decide to react to it, to respond to it? So I don't know why some people go through more, but I do know that we each have that individual ability to decide how we respond to even the most tragic news. And that's where our power lies.
Okay. Well, let's get it.
Yeah.
And thank you for that answer. It's just, this is, some days you just, or weeks or months you go through and it's like, it's like everything's fine. And then all of a sudden it's like within a matter of days, you hear bad news, like something bad happens to like multiple people and you're just like, why? And like you said, like, I believe we never are going to know the reasons why these things happen until I personally believe we meet our maker. That's like the one thing that I believe. But it's just like sometimes you have to take a step back and just go, well, why so much? Why so much at one time? So thank you for that. So I want to hear a little bit about you. So you live in Australia. You were originally a New Jersey girl. Tell me a little bit about you.
Sure. So I am Polish American, first generation in America, born and raised in New Jersey. And somewhere along the way, I made my way overseas quite indefinitely. So I've always had the privilege to travel to my roots to Poland when I was younger. And I think that's what sparked that interest in exploring different cultures, being in different places and traveling in me. But it wasn't until I finished college, university, that I decided to come to Australia for like a 6-month, was supposed to be 6-month overseas experience before I moved back, went to Manhattan, went back to my job, started the whole corporate career, and 6 months turned into almost 8 years of living overseas. So I currently live in Australia, but I've been based and professionally worked out of Hong Kong, New Zealand, and all over Southeast Asia and in some places in South America professionally. So we're going to be talking about grief today. A lot of travel involves a lot of grief.
I'm sure.
And changing and seeing the world, especially in spending so much time in developing world countries, really has an impact on you and on your understanding of self and the world. But today, essentially the way I progressed and was able to travel so much is I worked in experiential education and outdoor education. So for people that have never heard of that, which is most people, I would take youth and adults on these expeditions in different places. So we would do like hiking, backpacking, rock climbing, and really focus on cultural integration and community service work, leadership skills, emotional intelligence, and really understanding what it means to challenge your comfort zone, what it means to be with discomfort, and how can we use that as a tool for growth, as a tool for internal expansion, and really learning how to be our best self in the world. And since then, I had my whole burnout story, and, being a feminine leader in a masculine, male-dominated industry also provided so many challenges that I wasn't expecting, that we don't talk to young girls about, that this is the reality once you leave school. There's a lot of inequality in the world, especially in the workplace. And so I ended up leaving that industry and starting Expand and Impact, which is a developing school of emotional mastery and embodied self-leadership. So I work specifically with women, guiding others in the tools that we aren't taught in school, but that deeply shape how we feel about ourselves, how we relate to the world, and how we show up as leaders in an authentic way so that we can have the impact that we want, so that we can have the influence that we want without losing ourselves in it, without losing that connection to what's actually important to us and getting caught in all of the emotional turmoil or stress and adversity that exists. Because like you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, why are some things the way they are? I don't have an answer, but I know that there's so much that we can do about that. But if we don't have mastery and control over our own emotional state, we won't have the power to show up in a way where our voice actually can make a difference. So that's what I do today. And it's been influenced by my own experiences in that industry of coming in as a young, confident woman ready to experience the world and do something interesting, and leaving that industry a shell of myself, completely.
Let me stop you right there. Okay.
Sure.
Because there's always a reason why I talk to people at the exact moment when I do. And you're an example of that. This happens to me all the time. I don't know what I'm going to get into when I start the podcast, because for my listeners and for you, I've seen a bio and we've had a 2-minute conversation before we started recording. So really, you don't know the person, but I am a huge believer in things happening for a reason. Okay. That's good and bad. So meeting you today is a gift, really, because I feel like I'm meeting you at the exact moment where I had to learn and talk to you about how I'm feeling as a mother of 2 daughters and a female myself, and a female that came out of corporate America. And like you know, was brought up to not really think like women are really any different than men. I mean, we know it as young kids, right? The boys are always the ones that kind of get the accolades in sports, and the girls are supposed to be like pretty and go to dances. And, you know, I happen to have a 13-year-old. So I'm going through all the like middle school stuff that like literally I look up at the sky and go, baby Jesus, why do it? Like it's bringing like horrific flashbacks right now.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. But I love what you said. And I love your honesty and candor about, and I feel like an idiot bringing this up, but I'm going to bring it up. Gosh darn it all. Have you seen the Barbie movie?
I literally just saw it like 3 days ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have now seen it 2 times.
Okay.
I had like snot bubbles like coming out of my nose, bawling, crying in the theater, because people need to understand it's exactly that whole monologue that America Ferrer says, that you couldn't say it any better, right? It's like, it's kind of what you said. It's like, you're so excited. You get out of college. You're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to like teach these young kids about outdoor education and being like able
being
to
awesome.
like, being awesome,
being awesome.
And then you like go into the world like a baby chick, like with all this confidence, to just have it like scooped out of you to feel like a shell of a human, and that what you're doing in your life doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I was in corporate America. I would do say the same things at big meetings. I would do the same things as the men. I would watch the men get promoted, and I was treated like a dumb blonde always.
Yeah.
So I need to say that to you just by what you said. I was really, really struck by it. Go ahead.
Yeah. And what just came to mind as I'm hearing you reflect that back to me is just that feeling that I think many women can relate. You spend so much energy pushing, that takes away from like what you're actually meant to be doing and your genius zone and what you're actually good at and what you actually want to be pursuing, because you're putting all of this energy and mental and emotional effort just to keep your head above water, or to be seen, or to be heard, and to be understood, recognized, and acknowledged, and to be, you know, standing on an evil platform with your colleagues, with the people around you. It doesn't even have to be in the workplace. We see this all the time, just moving through the world. But I think that inner pressure to keep pushing is so common. And it's also the very thing that makes us successful, keeps us resilient, keeps going, but also is our downfall, and it burns us out. It makes us lose connection to ourselves. It makes us second guess our inherent worth, or like what we're even doing. Do I even contribute? Does my voice even matter? Is it easier just to stop? And there is a beautiful medium. There is that happy middle, but it does take learning the skill to redirect your focus and attention from that pushing externally back onto yourself. And I see that for you, perhaps it might have been stepping away completely and starting something new like podcasting, which I know is so freeing. It must be so freeing to be able to use your voice in this way after years and years of perhaps speaking into an empty room and waiting for someone to look at you and actually show that they're listening and that they care what you have to say.
So mine, for my listeners that know, mine manifested into like horrific panic attacks, it was a culmination of like, pretty much a nervous breakdown, and I had to get out. And then
Oh, me too.
Yeah. And then I was like,
in that way.
yeah. And so my therapist was like, you need to do something creative. And then I started this when I was drooling in a corner.
Amazing.
Not really, but I might as well have been in 2020. And then that's what I do now. So, but what I was going to ask you is, this is kind of off topic, but I think on topic. I always want to get to the bottom of, because I'm going to hold my little chapter in this book that came out because I don't talk enough about it. It's called Her Badass Story for my YouTubers. And I haven't been promoting it. You can get it on YouTube. And I'm writing my own book, but I wrote this chapter and I talk about in the chapter how I was in this horrible friend breakup and these women were so nasty. I call them the Karens. And
all the Karens.
Yeah, all the Karens. And so I always am curious when you talk about it being in an industry now where you're only dealing with women, do you have an opinion on why women are so mean to each other and can treat each other so horrifically? And to piggyback on that, I always wonder if it really stems from childhood and how we had to be like competing against each other for the boys, but also competing against each other in work, in all of the different things that we do. So it manifests into us being competitive and mean girls to each other. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that it's a little bit of everything you just shared.
Mm-hmm.
And primarily the shaping and the like internalized competition that we're taught at such a young age. And I recently shared this story with this group that I'm a part of. If it's okay for me to share, I feel like it would fit perfectly to kind of exemplify
That's
it.
what you're here for. Yeah, please.
So when I was in the 8th grade, we're going to go all the way back. I ran for student council class president. And I remember being so excited just to run, and I didn't feel any internal competition. I had my focus strictly on like, what can we do to make the school better so kids can have more fun, and all of these beautiful childhood dreams and things. But a part of me wanting to run, of course, was my older brother ran 5 years before me at the same school and he won. So it ignited this I suppose clarity in me that like, if my older brother can be president of the school, so can I. And I was running against my classmate called John. And I remember a pivotal switch in that moment where his friends started to come up to me during the election process and telling me that I wasn't going to win. And that people liked him better than they liked me. And that he was the obvious choice to become class president in the 8th grade. And I remember in those moments where my classmates would come up to me and tell me that I wasn't going to win, that armor started to close up. And I went from being excited to be class president, not understanding what that means at that young age, to starting to armor up and feeling that self-doubt start to trickle in. So what does it mean if I lose? Do people not like me? Why would they come up to me and tell me I wasn't going to win when I wasn't even thinking about competition or competing or being better than someone? Because I was just competing with myself. And I remember starting the election process really excited. And before they announced the winner, I was so nervous and riddled with self-doubt and uncertain about what the outcome could be. Whereas before that, I wasn't even really considering the outcome. I was thinking of the impact that being in this role could have at such a young age. And needless to say, there was this moment where we were sitting in English class, 8th grade English, Mr. Barrow's room. And they announced it over the speaker who won the election. And I won. And I felt myself open up with excitement until I looked across the room and the boy that I was running against was hysterically crying. So all of the attention was on him because he was like inconsolable, and he was asked to leave the room for a moment to put himself together. And I never got that moment of celebration. So there was this like interesting experience at such a young age of like, oh wow, I actually won, and like feeling myself open up again. And then seeing that perhaps there isn't room to celebrate, or that my winning means I took away from someone else. Since I won, I upset him because this was the reaction. And of course, at such a young age, you blame yourself because that's how the human mind works, right? It creates stories.
Your brain's not fully developed, obviously. Yeah.
As women, your brain isn't fully developed until you're about 27. Yeah, like 27. So you start to internalize all of these experiences, right? And I thought that it was my fault, that I upset him because I won. And I think these moments that we experience in life are the thing that make us compete with each other. And especially as women, when you do work in a male dominated field, I think it's different when you're not, if you're working maybe in a field that's more balanced or more like maybe like marketing. I know there's a lot more women in that kind of field, or like creative industries as well. But especially in male dominated field, there is this really internalized competition, this internalized pressure, and this like scarcity where there isn't enough for everyone. And then you see it in the hierarchy of the process, right? There's only a certain amount of roles that you could be promoted to. So what does it mean if you're left behind? What does it mean if you're not the one that's being chosen for these roles, or you're not being acknowledged for your work? And we start to internalize this competition and this not enoughness in life. There isn't enough space for me. If I win, maybe I take away from someone else. Not everyone has that insecurity. Some people are on the other side, pounding through, not caring who they leave in the dust. But nonetheless, it's that same type of energy of there not being enough, and there being limited opportunity for people, limited relationships, romantic relationships. We can see this in different areas of our life. And specifically in terms of like the competition against women, I know that in these industries, there is this pressure to kind of be one of the boys, to change yourself, and anything that doesn't help you to move forward or to succeed in a way that we're taught you should, you reject, you compete against. And I was actually bullied in my industry by a woman, and I had never experienced that before. I was in my mid-20s, and again, I came in excited. I was managing a really big team. I was training people to be the next leaders and learn all the skills. And I remember just being so rejected by this woman. And she was so mean to me for no reason. From the moment she met me, she just, I guess, decided she didn't like me for whatever reason.
Because you were a threat. And going back to your story, because I have to pipe in, so I have a middle schooler, like I just said, and you were giving me flashbacks. And she happened to tell me a story. She came home in tears. She was at some party, and some boy said, "Everyone in the class hates you." And I was just like, what? Like, why? Why would you say that? And then I remembered, like, boys in particular, they say if they have a crush on you or whatever it is, they say mean things. But our brains, like you were saying, we're not capable of understanding like an adult would. If somebody said that to you, you'd be like, whatever, and walk away. Maybe not everybody, but most people could just be like, walk away, be bothered by it, but just not like obsess over it. So what I think is important about what you said is that was a pivotal moment in your life. You know, we all have these pivotal moments in our lives that we'll never forget. You were able, you're very empathetic, obviously. And I think sometimes, and I'm empathetic too. Sometimes people that are really empathetic, you maybe wouldn't even have noticed that boy crying in a corner, right? If you were a different kind of person. So really think about that. Like you were that young girl, you're one of these core memories of your life is, I won this contest. I did it. I'm a girl. Like people didn't want me to win. They didn't want me to succeed. I did it. The boy made everybody pin people against you, took the attention, but instead it hurt you, but you also are an empathetic person, and you realized, wait a minute, like I care. Whereas some people would have just been like, even kids be like, whatever, he's crying. This is about me, turned and got the rest of the class's attention or made fun of him. You never know how kids are going to go, you know? So it's interesting how a core memory like that will affect you for the rest of your life. I know that I have horrific memories like that from my childhood. And, you know, girls are so, so mean, even as young kids, and boys, like teasing. I think it's because people need to do a better job of teaching young kids, sitting them down and being like, this is not your role in life. Like, young boy, like, you don't have to be a professional athlete, a banker, like a lawyer. You don't have to like work so hard and not talk about your mental health. So by the time you're in your 40s or 50s, you have a nervous breakdown and don't know how to deal with like your emotions. Whereas women, we need to do a better job of supporting each other, really supporting each other, and not going up against each other and being unkind and mean and talking shit about each other, just like genuinely supporting each other. And that comes from childhood. And honestly, if there was a manual on me being able to understand exactly what to say to my young 13-year-old when she's being bullied, I wish I did, because I don't understand. But I love what you're saying. I think it's so, so important. But I kind of want to backpedal a little bit to the like I'm kind of jumped ahead and now I'm jumping back to the part of you that was in that industry. And then you ended up traveling all over the place, left what you were doing because you were a shell of a human being, and why you do what you do today. Is that too much of a mouthful?
No, not at all. Would you like me to expand on like how that happened, or?
I would love it. Yeah, I would love it. Also, why am I saying piggyback all the time? It's so weird. I want to
Piggyback's forward, no?
I'm like, and by the way, let me piggyback and come back around.
Let me table
I don't know why I say that sometimes. It's so weird. You know what I think it is? Side note, sidebar. One time I was in a meeting and there was this man and I was very impressed by him, and he was giving this whole speech, and I remember him being like, let me piggyback on that idea. So now all the time when I'm recording and I'm interviewing people, I think I use piggyback way too much. So that my sidebar is about like doing outdoor ed and being in the outdoors and the things that you were doing. Might I add, there is nothing worse to me as a human being than being in the outdoors, camping and testing my my skills, anything like that. I would have been like, let me out of here immediately, and called like my mom to pick me up. So can you tell me kind of, I know that we have been all over the place, but why you ended up in that industry originally, and then like kind of tell me how it got you to your wit's end.
Sure. So I'm a believer that the desires and the things that interest us individually are unique to us. Mm-hmm. And I've always, since I was younger, had this burning desire for adventure. I started snowboarding from a young age. I've been snowboarding for like 20 years. And I was always interested in wanting to travel. And I knew from a young age that I wanted to live overseas and get paid for it. That's all I knew. There were no more details. I didn't even know that outdoor ed existed. It doesn't exist on the East Coast. I think there's maybe a few more universities now in the US that teach it, but I actually studied something completely different in college and was a part of an outdoor program that gave me enough skills and qualifications to apply for this job that I found online in Australia. Mm-hmm. And that's how I ended up moving to Australia the first time. I've moved a couple of times back and forth now. And like I mentioned, it was supposed to be a 6-month experience with the skills that I learned in this program, now going into this industry. And when I came to Australia, I realized that it's an actual industry, that people here have bachelor's, master's, even doctorates in outdoor education. And it opened up this new career path that I didn't know was possible, that I didn't know was how can I say this, like legitimate, because from the outside, it looks like, oh, you're just like traveling with kids, or you're having fun. When are you going to take life seriously? But actually, when you're in this industry, it's a lot of responsibility, and you need to have a really high medical qualification, a lot of training on yourself and in like technical skills, which also creates the gap between, you know, men and women. Because we're looked at as the carers, we're not looked at as the climbing guide that can secure someone to safety who's 2 times our weight, you know? So there's a lot of these like barriers that you have to break through. But essentially, that's how I got into the industry. And it took me all over the world. And I was educating and teaching, leading and guiding for about 10 years in this industry. And it was really beautiful in a lot of ways, because I've seen parts of the world and was immersed in communities that aren't accessible to just the normal person who wants to go traveling. Mm-hmm. We were in communities. I remember one time we were building like a toilet for a monk because he wanted one next to his temple. Or we were building like sinks for kids to wash their hands in front of their school because they didn't have accessible water in certain parts of their village. And there was a lot of privilege involved, and it really highlighted to me my own privilege and where I came from. And at the same time, there was that opposite experience of understanding my privilege, but also not being acknowledged or respected for what I bring to the table, especially working in these countries where women had few rights. Coming in as a female leader was a really interesting thing to hold, with a lot of complexity involved in it. But essentially, kind of to tie things together, you mentioned core, like the core situation that happens, like a core memory. And I love the way you put that, because that moment is one of the things that solidified my core story of not being enough and not being smart enough. And it's from this energy that I spent 10 years working in this industry, having to prove my worth, prove that I am good enough, prove that I know what I'm doing, that I'm qualified, that I spent all these years training, and that I can keep people safe. I can educate people, and like I am worthy of the places that I'm going in and the work that I'm doing. And leading from that energy of low self-worth and low self-esteem is what made me completely disconnect from myself. And from the outside looking in, people thought I was confident. You have to have a certain level of grit and confidence to leave your home country, to go off on loan. You have to have a certain level of confidence to be able to manage big teams in foreign countries that you have never been to, that you don't speak the language. So there's a lot of confidence on the outside that I had. But on the inside, my main motivating factor was show them that I'm good enough. Show them that I'm smart enough.
And it all and it all stems back from John, you know, like
one of the pieces.
Amazing. You know, like these stories, you'll never forget these like core memories, like we talked about, that you have to prove like, no, I'm going to fake it. I'm fine. Mm-hmm. I have to do this. I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do, until finally you get to a point where you become a skeleton of yourself and you just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, because there's no room for you to struggle in these situations. And showing emotional vulnerability is perceived as a weakness. And so I internalized my experience. I had to have a hard face on, especially when other people are leaning on you. And this could go beyond your professional life. When you are a mother and a family is leaning on your strength, it can be really difficult to connect with that vulnerability that makes us human, and to really come to terms with how we are experiencing the moment, and admitting that perhaps we're not okay in this moment, or that we're struggling too. And that doesn't mean that we're not good enough. It doesn't mean we're not smart enough. It means that we're human. And I think a lot of these industries and a lot of these narratives in society take away our humanness. They take away our right to experience the full spectrum of emotions, because we label emotions good and bad, or strong and weak. Mm-hmm. And I was stuck in that unconsciously. Of course, this was not even in my awareness. I had no idea I was doing this. It wasn't until I didn't recognize myself in the mirror, where I was hiding in the bathroom to cry in the middle of my shift. And I got physically sick. I started to have these really intense abdominal pain that were unexplainable. And now I know that it was internalized stress. It was internalized stress and trauma that I was holding in my belly. And I would grip my gut all day and do my job, show up, be strong. And then when I would lay down to sleep, I would release to go to sleep. And in that release, I had to run up and make it to the bathroom to vomit. And I had this like physical, like my body was physically rejecting the way I was living and the way I was working. And when I started to notice, like the first time that happened, I was like, oh, that's weird. I wonder why. Maybe it was something I ate. And then I noticed it kept happening every single night I was at work, because when you're in this industry, you're on 24/7. So it's like a contract shift work. And when you start a program, you may be there for 5 days to 3 weeks, however long, until you have your time off, which is also why I got to travel so much, because I had a lot of time off in between work. And I noticed that I would become physically sick every single night I stayed at work. And on the weekend, I wasn't, when I was at home. And that was a huge moment of awakening for me that showed me I have to change what I'm doing. Something is terribly wrong because my body is rejecting it. I can't deny it anymore. I can't rationalize it. I can't intellectualize it away, because my body is physically stopping me to look at. It's stopping me to consider what is happening here and stop ignoring these red flags that I'm looking at as like a challenge. And I think any ambitious woman can resonate with this, especially coming from like a very competitive field. We see any resistance as a challenge that we have to overcome. And we get excited by it, right? We're like, oh yeah, you said I can't do it. I'll show you.
Especially if you're an alpha female. Especially if you're an alpha female. Like we're taught, we're like, oh no, you're not. And you sounds like you have
yes,
that
I am.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like that too. And it can rub people the wrong way. And, you know, if we were men, we wouldn't have this, nobody would treat us the same way. We would be treated very differently. I'll say that. How did you end up, like, what was your breaking point where you were able, because what I hate saying I love about your story because it sounds horrifically sad. But also there's great things about it. Like you said, like who gets to like travel the world and help others in need and do all the things that you've done, but then to take
and be unhappy.
Yeah. But then take a step out of your body and say, I cannot do this anymore. You know, I'm very like, I told you I'm spiritual, but Tim Braun is a psychic I had on. He's a very famous psychic and I've gone to him several times. And he said to me, before COVID happened, he said, if you don't get out of like your current situation, he's like, you're going to have cancer and die. Like something's going to go wrong. You cannot keep at this pace. You cannot keep doing what you're doing. So I really had to like kind of take myself out of my body. There was also like all different kinds of things going on in 2019 and early 20. And to be able to like look out, like take myself out of my body and go, I need to do something else. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And then, you know, now I'm doing the things I'm doing, which I think I'm so lucky every week to do this. But look at you took yourself out of the situation and now you're doing what you're doing. But think of how many people don't get that gift. They stay in these situations. They continue to let themselves be beaten up until it turns into something where it's an illness or the heart attack or all the things that can manifest in the body to becoming. Yeah. So I think it's a gift that you and I got to these places, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, because I see it as two paths. The path where you're pushing forward with your resilience and your grit and your willpower because you're strong and you have a goal. And then your body stops you, like it perhaps did for the both of us. And then the other path where you lean on support earlier and you start to get curious and question whether life is supposed to be feeling like this. We often deny how much wisdom there is in our feelings and don't stop to consider what they're trying to show us. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of suppress them or numb out or stay busy. And we never a lot of people don't create enough, I guess, quiet time in their day to see what's beneath the surface. So you can either keep moving one way until your body stops you abruptly, because it always will, whether through physical illness, burnout, which is still physical illness, or, something worse, or maybe something a bit more mild, or you start to notice and listen to these types of conversations and do something about it sooner so that you don't have to go through the pain that causes. Because the thing that isn't commonly spoken about is how long it takes to come back to yourself after that. After an entire lifetime of pushing, because me being in this industry wasn't the reason why this happened. That was just one of the things. And then it opened up to me all of the other layers beneath the surface that were manifesting this reality for me in a way that was making me push and making me believe that that's the only way to be successful, to live a good life that is admirable and, respectable. These words, it's like they kind of feel not so nice to say, but I think deep down, a lot of us want these things. We want to be acknowledged by other people. We want to be validated by other people. It's a human need. And it took me 2 years after this, noticing that my body was rejecting my experience. It took me about 2 years to actually feel like myself again. And when I started to feel like myself,
like, how did you, sorry to talk over you, but how did you get to that point?
Luckily, my contract ended with the company that I was working in, and I decided to not come back. And this was the time my partner and we were doing long distance for about a year. He was in Australia. I was in Hong Kong at the time when this happened. And we decided to see if our relationship was worth pursuing. And we moved to New Zealand together. And the second we moved there, all of those years of pushing caught up with me, and I just collapsed. I fell into a really deep depression for close to a year. Mm-hmm. And I did the bare minimum just to get through. And I had a lot of time to think and rage and be expressive and really unfiltered in my humanness in that moment. And I was really in that pain. But for the first time, I didn't mask it with busyness. I didn't mask it with achievement or having goals. I was just sitting in that pain. And it revealed a lot to me. It revealed to me that my motivators for believing that this was the only way to live went way further before I even started working and had a dream to be in any type of industry or any type of leader. It went back to my childhood. It went back to unprocessed and unresolved emotions, moments where I was let down and disappointed and didn't have someone to explain these situations to me and to normalize my experience. And for the first time, the way I started to get out of it, to answer more directly, is I started to give myself the things that I wanted from other people. But I had to realize that that's what I was doing all those years. Because when you're in it...
How did you figure that out? You're a smart cookie. That's a hard thing to do.
It is a hard thing to do. And this is why I always encourage anyone who relates to this that you're not supposed to do it alone. Mm-hmm. And had I had support beforehand, I wouldn't have had to go through 2 years of getting myself out of a hole to realize, who am I? How does it feel to be me? How does it feel to be in a body that is open to life and with an open heart that isn't afraid of being hurt, that isn't afraid of being rejected, but to stand firmly in myself, in my own self-trust that I can figure it out even when shit hits the fan, mm-hmm. instead of closing off from the world. I did it slowly. I spent a lot of time journaling and just noticing what came up. And actually meditation was a really big saving grace for me during this time. My partner, like I mentioned, we were doing long distance at the time, so he didn't know how to support me, but he was really the only person that I had in my support network who didn't make me feel guilty for my decision to live overseas, who validated my dreams and my desire to continue on with the work I was doing. And he supported me the only way he knew how. And that was by encouraging me at one point when he saw that I was like really losing it, to just do 5 minutes of meditation every day. Just make that small promise to myself. Nothing too big, the small amount of 5 minutes, just do that. And in those moments of stillness, where it started maybe even with 3 minutes, I couldn't sit still for very long. I had to sit in the busy thoughts, the endless thoughts. I had to sit in the sensations that I was experiencing that like made me feel like I was just constantly living on edge. And there came a certain point in my practice where I started to break open, and I started to have these realizations and really connect with the truth beneath my experience, and really connect with the truth of why I felt I needed to show up the way I was showing up. And, the story goes much deeper. I started off initially in like fashion, working in PR in Manhattan before I took this like gap experience in Australia, going into a male dominated industry where I had to wear loose pants. I had to wear a certain type of clothing to not be too revealing. And I had to completely hide any femininity that I had. So these two polar extremes of being conditioned to be—
I would have lasted 5 minutes. I'm just letting you know. I would have been fired.
I don't even know how. I wore leggings once and I got like in trouble, reprimanded for that. And at the time, it's like, you don't know what you don't know. And I was young, and it's like, if you want to make it in this industry, this is what you have to do. So you adapt. But the ways that we adapt in life, we don't realize how it has the power to actually shrink us and to disconnect us from being fully trusting in who we are. And for a long time, I was like embarrassed of my femininity because that was seen as not serious or weak in the industry. And these were all of the things that I started to realize during my meditation practice of where I was giving my power away and what I was seeking from others, that external validation, and where I was compromising so much of myself, because that's what it really comes down to. How much of yourself are you compromising in these moments to get ahead or to reach a certain goal, whether it's professional or personal?
That is so heavy and deep. Yeah. I love it so much. It also reminds me of like what we were talking about in the beginning, where you can't, like, if you're a woman, you can be feminine, but you can't be too feminine. You can be this, but you can't be too that. Right.
Mm-hmm. The Barbie movie.
I'm kind of embarrassed. I keep referencing the Barbie movie, but if you haven't seen it, listeners, go out and see it. Cause for me, and I saw it with my 2 daughters. I just thought it was an unbelievably well-made movie. So let's kind of get to like present day for the sake of time. Cause I could talk to you for a very long time. How did you get to become a brain body trainer and a holistic therapist? How did that happen?
So I noticed a gap in the industry, which was essentially that we weren't allowed to bring all of ourselves to the table, that you had to kind of fit the mold of what it was to be a leader in this industry. And when I started to kind of awaken and mend these wounds that I was experiencing, I just started to follow my curiosity. And I know that sounds like really basic, but I think it's such an important skill to develop. It's a skill because we're so conditioned to focus on things outside of ourselves that we deny our own curiosities and actually how those are the things that will connect us with the path that we're supposed to be on. And I was looking for some kind of program online, and I found this counseling diploma and this trauma diploma that had certain like modalities that I was interested in. And there was like a 2-step process. You can either just do the certificate and like learn the thing, or you can continue on 2 or 3 years and actually get qualified to treat patients and to work with people using the skills that you learn. So I simply enrolled in it to learn about these few categories that were interesting to me. And when I was in it, that's what opened up my world. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe this is what I've been I was supposed to be doing all along. And I ended up going through the entire program and developing Expand and Impact afterwards as a space where women can learn these skills, where we can have a space to slow down just enough to connect with that curiosity and to see all those little places.
Tell me about what Expand and Impact is, and then a little bit about the podcast with the same name that you started.
So Expand and Impact is a school of emotional mastery and embodied self-leadership. And I guide women through many processes that involve working with the thoughts and how we can harness the stories in our mind to quiet down the mind and listen to that voice behind the busyness that is always trying to guide us. We work with the emotional body somatically. So somatic-based practices to release any stored trauma or stored stress in the body that is keeping us feeling like we're always going on that same cycle of the patterns we're trying to go away from. And we really practice developing our awareness and cultivating a new intimacy with ourselves, with the inner critic that most of us have, these different parts of us where we feel like a part of us wants to keep pushing and going towards the goal, but a part of us has its foot on the brake. And then we feel this like stuckness, this push pull in life. I feel like I'm supposed to be, or I want to go this way, but I feel like something's pulling me back and it's feeling a bit off. There are reasons why we feel this push pull. And in the things that I teach in my Expand and Impact mentorship program, small group trainings, are the skills rooted in emotional intelligence, nervous system regulation, mind-body practices of working with the thoughts, beliefs, and really integrating all of these aspects from different fields in psychology, somatic experiencing, neuroscience, to complement our whole person, because we're a whole person. And there's no one quick fix for anything. But my goal with this school that I'm developing, and we're still in the early stages, is to have a place where all of these skills can be explored.
It sounds amazing.
So we can lead.
It sounds amazing. and you specialize mainly in women, correct?
Yeah. Okay. Right now, I hope in the future we can open it up to everyone. But right now, I don't have the capacity with the small team that I have to do that. But we specialize with female leaders and goal getters. So anyone who wants to be a leader or develop their own leadership skills and really own that you can be a leader in all areas of your life. It doesn't need to be professionally, but how do you show up and lead in your home life, in your personal life? Because everything is interconnected, as I'm sure you know. How you do one thing is how you do everything. So how can we build a bridge so that everything feels cohesive, everything feels aligned, where we're not compartmentalizing ourselves and morphing ourselves constantly of having to show up this way to fit in here. And then I take off the mask and fit in here, because that's exhausting. That's so tiring.
Yeah. It's like, it sounds like you did a lot of that. That was like the best at that, because I was constantly running from dealing with who I really was, and I think a lot of women and men deal with that, especially if you're in sales or whatever you do, you have to kind of morph your personality into being able to talk to people, whoever they are. So it's a lot. Can people reach out to you and work with you if they are not in Australia? Are you available via Zoom or?
Yeah, I work mainly online. So most of my clients are actually in North America.
Okay.
And you can reach out to me on Instagram, Expand and Impact, or LinkedIn under my name, Violetta Znorkowski, if that's more your thing. And like you mentioned, the podcast as well is a good place to kind of tune in, where we explore these topics of kind of a bridge between science and spirituality, and how that can help us live an authentic and successful life.
Well, I need to listen to the podcast because it sounds right up my alley. Violet, I'm so honored to meet you. I think that you're wonderful. I think that what you're doing is just incredible. And I hope that people reach out to you. I know I actually might be, because what you do is right up my alley and exactly what I need right now. I think it's really important that, on a side note, that we deal with our trauma. I say a lot of times, if you're somebody, like, I'll use myself. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD a few years ago, stemming from my childhood. And for my whole life, I ran and I hid behind characters and my humor. And I was so afraid to be my authentic self, and I was like, well, nobody's going to like me if I'm not funny, Meghan, or I'm not this, or I'm not that, or I don't look a certain way, until one day, like I kind of talked about, I got to a breaking point. And I think what you do in life, we have such a short time on this planet. Live your life, be happy, make other people happy. I say that at the end of every podcast. Because we're only here for such a short time. And if you have stuff that you have to work through, really try to reach out to somebody and work through it. If that's one person, like you said, your partner in the beginning was, you were afraid to reach out, and you found that one person. Find that one person, go to the one person and say, I'm struggling, or I'm not happy, or this is like really breaking me. And that one person can maybe help you reach out to another person. And then it kind of turns into, like I say a lot, like where you're building the campfire and then the sparks start to fly and then the fire spreads. So it's really important that you can run for the rest of your life from your trauma and that wounded inner child, like we talked about. But it's going to catch up to you. It's eventually going to catch up to you. And so we have the choice in our life. You and I are lucky because we got to a point where we said enough. And I hope my listeners that are listening, each and every one of you, know that you deserve better in life. So if you're feeling the ways that we talked about that we were feeling, be proud of yourself, love yourself, because enough is enough, and you deserve to be happy, and you deserve to be free in this life, and you deserve to work on yourself and be kind to yourself and love yourself. And so I'm going to get off my soapbox. And once again, thank you so much, Violet. It was such an honor to meet you. And everyone, be happy by making other people happy.
Thank you so much for having me, Meghan. This was such a pleasure and a joy. Thank you. I love your work.
Thank you.
Judging Meghan with Meghan Judge.